Welcome to The Debate. Our focus today, well, it centers on the profoundly unstable dynamics between Washington and Tehran. This is all coming after the pretty dramatic joint U.S. and Israeli airstrikes back in June. Now, those strikes targeted 3 critical Iranian nuclear sites and were followed almost immediately by President Trump's explicit threat to, quote, obliterate any new nuclear development. The central question we're wrestling with is this: does the demonstrable destruction of Iran's nuclear infrastructure, does that fundamentally shift the balance of power and compel Tehran back to the table, but under weakened conditions? Or has this military action just solidified the intransigence on both sides and, frankly, heightened the long-term risk of more conflict? The central question we're wrestling with is this: I'm going to argue that the strikes did succeed. They crippled Iran's program, generated clear military leverage, and forced a necessary recognition of their losses.
And I'm going to take the opposing view, because despite the severe physical damage, and it was severe, the military action, I think, failed in its primary objective, which was to compel a change in Tehran's diplomatic posture. The facts on the ground, the continued stalemate, they confirm that coercion has only intensified the conflict. Instead of yielding leverage, the strikes really just reinforced Supreme Leader Khamenei's narrative of ideological resistance. I believe the impasse is solidified, not broken.
My core premise is really founded on the tangible military success of the action. The June attacks, they decisively reset the threat clock and generated leverage that just didn't exist before. Before the intervention, the prevailing assessment was alarmingly urgent. Iran was nearing nuclear breakout capacity within months or possibly weeks. That timeline created a severe pressure point. It justified the necessity of decisive action. Now that urgency is gone. U.S. assessments confirm those key enrichment facilities are destroyed, rendered unusable. They'd need an entirely new program launch. So Trump's confidence when he declares Iran's nuclear capacity gone, it stems from this physical reality. Analysts estimate this destruction mandates entirely new sites and extended rebuilding period. And Trump's repetition of, they missed that opportunity, but they would like to make a deal right now. Well, that suggests a clear reading in Washington that the severity of the damage they've suffered, the death that they've suffered, is the catalyst forcing Tehran back to the table from a position of weakness.
I see it differently. I think I'd frame the whole issue differently. The measure of success here isn't the amount of concrete that was destroyed, but whether the strikes achieved the political and diplomatic goal. And the material shows they have not. While I acknowledge the physical destruction was significant, the strategic objective, moving toward a new agreement, is demonstrably stalled. Diplomacy is at a complete standstill. There are no negotiations scheduled, and crucially, Tehran continues to reject the core U.S. demands. Things like limits on enrichment, cessation of missile development,
Right.
and dismantling regional alliances. If the military action truly generated this insurmountable leverage, we should see some convergence. Instead, we see the Supreme Leader actively dismissing the speculation of renewed conflict as, quote, enemy propaganda. And critically, he's framing the entire confrontation as a spiritual war. This move is key. It reframes physical loss as ideological resilience. And the refusal to be seen capitulating confirms that the primary diplomatic objective, a weakened, deal-seeking Tehran, has failed. The only verifiable outcome so far is that the region remains vulnerable to renewed escalation.
The distinction you draw between physical destruction and political coercion is fair. But I think we have to first establish the overwhelming effectiveness of the physical action itself. The U.S. assessment that the facilities were, quote, wiped out and require entirely new sites, that validates this as a decisive intervention against an urgent existential threat. This wasn't a pinprick. It was a fundamental disruption to their nuclear trajectory. The physical reality of that destruction is a massive piece of leverage that did not exist before June. It imposes a massive, non-negotiable cost, and furthermore, the deterrent is actively maintained by Trump's subsequent threat to obliterate that one too. This constant threat, it forces a new strategic calculus in Tehran, where the cost of pursuing their ambition is now confirmed to be immediate, unsustainable destruction.
But the leverage only matters if it changes the actor's intent or their behavior. I contend that forcing Iran to rebuild and possibly relocate its program hasn't reduced the long-term threat. It may have actually exacerbated it. We accept that the immediate threat, that breakout scenario you cite, is delayed.
Yes.
Okay, but what happens next? The statement that the program is gone is frankly overly simplistic. Tehran insists it never sought nuclear weapons to begin with, which means the underlying political framework driving enrichment is completely untouched. So if they are now required to build entirely new sites, they'll inevitably do so with greater secrecy, probably deeper underground, and in ways that just complicate international inspections and monitoring. We've essentially traded an immediate, known problem for a future, potentially more opaque and dangerous problem in unknown locations. How does increasing opacity equate to gaining leverage?
That's a thoughtful point on the risk of opacity, but I believe it misreads the core deterrent mechanism. While new sites may be harder to find, the threat of obliteration is now undeniably credible. It's backed by demonstrated capability and intent. The decision for Tehran is no longer can they achieve breakout, but can they afford to initiate a multi-billion-dollar, multi-year rebuild, only to risk its immediate destruction. The leverage is the catastrophic risk calculation, not the ease of inspection. And I also believe the Iranian appetite for a deal is far greater than their rhetoric suggests. Trump's assertion that Iran would like to make a deal right now is compelling precisely because the June strikes forced losses, including death, that could have been avoided. We're not just talking about economic costs here, we're talking human costs and regime vulnerability.
I just fundamentally disagree that the severity of the loss necessarily translates into a willingness to negotiate under duress. To rely so heavily on Trump's assertion of Tehran's desire for a deal is, I think, analytically weak when the verifiable facts on the ground contradict it. Let's be precise. Neither side has taken substantive, verifiable steps toward resuming negotiations.
But the back channels.
But where are the Iranian concessions on missile limitations or regional influence? They maintain their uncompromising rejection of U.S. conditions, and if the internal messaging is any indicator, the regime is doubling down. Khamenei's choice of language, framing this as a spiritual war and emphasizing resilience, that's a political strategy. It's designed specifically to neutralize the perceived leverage created by the strikes. The regime is prioritizing its ideological standing over a potentially favorable short-term outcome. The political costs of capitulating to military force just outweigh the cost of replacing the infrastructure.
In a layer. It's designed for domestic consumption, for maintaining loyalty. But high rhetoric doesn't change the engineering reality. Iran cannot produce highly enriched uranium at destroyed sites. The June strikes were a necessary physical intervention to neutralize a measurable and urgent threat. The sheer fact of the destruction, the verifiable damage and death, proves that physical force, when deployed decisively, is the ultimate currency. It generates immediate, actionable leverage. It forces Tehran to reconsider its strategic calculus. They can't sustain a nuclear program if every new site is under confirmed threat of immediate obliteration. The posturing is just them buying time to save face before accepting the inevitable.
I hear you on the physical reality, but isn't Khamenei deliberately trying to make the physical damage irrelevant by redefining this fight as fundamentally spiritual and informational? This is where our core disagreement lies. If Tehran genuinely views this as a propaganda war over influence and ideology, then physical strikes, while painful, don't address the root political motivations. By elevating the conflict to an ideological level, the regime successfully minimizes the military impact in the eyes of its hardliners and its allies. They're signaling that military might does not equal diplomatic surrender. This mindset suggests that physical force alone is fundamentally insufficient to achieve complex diplomatic goals. It only reinforces the divide, making a resolution more distant, because both sides are now fighting on different battlefields, one physical, one ideological.
So to summarize my position, the June strikes definitively halted an urgent nuclear breakout timeline. They neutralized an immediate, catastrophic threat. This decisive action generated clear, demonstrated military leverage, compelling Iran to accept the severity of its losses, both material and human. And while talks are currently delayed, which I attribute to necessary political posturing, The fundamental shift in the balance of power dictates that Tehran must eventually compromise to end this cycle of destruction. The alternative, further obliteration, is now a confirmed and credible reality.
And to reiterate my opposing view, while the physical infrastructure suffered demonstrable damage, the core diplomatic and ideological problem is unchanged. We have not seen any convergence on crucial U.S. demands. The continued rejection of these conditions, coupled with the Supreme Leader's counter-narrative of a spiritual war, it all indicates that military action has only entrenched both sides. This has simultaneously increased the overall risk of conflict and failed to provide a substantive path toward negotiation or stability. The impasse persists because physical force alone, well, it just can't solve an ideological confrontation.
We both acknowledge the remarkable inflexibility on display, as both sides adhere to these, very uncompromising positions.
Indeed, it confirms that while the nuclear infrastructure may be physically crippled, the political and ideological confrontation remains fully active, perhaps now operating on a level where military solutions are even less applicable.
And the ongoing critical absence of high-level diplomacy really just underscores the sheer volatility of this situation, confirming that there's still so much to analyze in the implications of both military action and the resulting diplomatic inertia.